We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to the latest Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined by two grizzled rogues. The Daily Record's head of news, Mark Smith.
Listen to grizzled.
Listen, I'm still in my 40s. There could be no comeback to that.
I can't remember.
I know it's hard to believe, but it is true. And of course, the Scottish Daily Express editor, Ben Borland. So let's get cracking. Keir Starmer earlier this month announced phase 2 of the Labour government. Since then, we've had Angela Rayner resigning, a chaotic reshuffle. We've had an aide resigning over sexual messages about Diane Abbott, and also the sacking of Lord Mandelson. So it's going really well.
I'm reminded of the Simpsons character, Sideshow Bob, easy for me to say, who keeps walking on a lawn full of rakes. And he keeps standing on the rakes and smashing himself in the face, right? It looks to me like Starmer is wandering about a lawn. The rakes have got health and safety tape all around them. They're flashing red. They're saying, do not come near. And he's still walking on them with his big clown shoe and smacking himself in the face. What is he thinking? Now, the Mandelson thing, it was entirely predictable that Mandelson would be good friends with lots and lots of very unsavoury people. Entirely predictable. And what's more, I think it's worth saying, he was appointed for precisely that reason. He was appointed because he knew people in American life and society who are unsavoury but might have links to Trump. That's why they put him in place. So the idea that...
So are you shocked that a guy who resigned twice as a minister in Labour government got himself into a mess the third time?
As I say, it was a rake that was entirely spottable, and he still managed to smack himself in the face. To a less serious extent, I think the Rayner stuff was maybe less predictable, and I feel like Angela Rayner, it was a muddle, not a fiddle. I don't think she's a dishonest person. I think that was events, dear boy, that landed on him. But the other entirely predictable rake, from a Scottish perspective, was the sacking of Ian Murray, a universally popular figure within Scottish Labour, a very effective Scottish secretary.
Fellow Jambo.
I mean, that's
not clouding your judgment at all.
At all. No. The man who saved my football club, the manner in which he was dispensed with by Starmer did Starmer no credit whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, I have been a cheerleader for Starmer. I think he has the potential still to possibly turn it around. But yeah, an absolutely disastrous few weeks, and much of it entirely predictable.
I mean, Ben, Labour wanted to be soaring going into their conference into Liverpool. Now they're sinking.
Oh, they are. I mean, I remember coming on here in the first week in January. You asked for predictions for the year. I think I predicted that Starmer might be gone by the end of the year, and
I think I guffawed at that.
I think I did guffaw. No chance for the. I actually looked it up.
Yes.
No chance.
It's September, so
and you see, after that, I kind of came round a bit to Starmer, but the last few weeks, I'm back to that opinion. I think he's done. I think at the very latest he'll be gone after the Scottish and Welsh and London.
Is that the trigger point if Labour get humped in Wales and Scotland?
I mean, another bad budget could be the trigger. At this point, anything could be the trigger. I think he's in that precarious a position. You've got Andy Burnham on manoeuvres. People are openly talking about who replaces Starmer. People within the Labour Party. I think literally one more thing could topple him. Now, what that could be, like you say, some of these are very predictable. Some of them just come out of nowhere, although I do think, I agree, Rayner was probably not deliberately dishonest, but it was such an avoidable thing.
Yeah.
You're told, listen, we don't think you've got to pay stamp duty, but you should really get it checked twice, and she didn't get it checked.
I think that was probably the biggest disaster for him, because Rayner, I think, in terms of like connecting with ordinary members of the public, probably his best message carrier in terms of like maybe fending off the threat of reform. I think she kind of speaks the language of just ordinary working people. I think, and if he'd fallen, she would have been the most obvious replacement. Now she's done.
Finished, yeah.
And so, I mean, that's just a monumentally bad loss for Starmer and for the wider Labour Party.
Yeah. I think Starmer's got various problems. One of his, I think, fundamental problems is he's not connecting with working class people. And I mean, I see it anecdotally with the people I speak to every week, but I also see it in the polling, and I see it in just his messaging. He's not connecting with working class people. He has to sort that out. Now, how does he sort that out? He needs to think of 3 reasons why the Labour government exists. Think of any 3. And he needs to just repeat the message ad nauseum. And those, they have to be around cost of living, they have to be around making people better off, and they need to be about listening to people's actual concerns on the ground. He's kind of failing on all those fronts. And if he cannot connect with working class voters for whatever reason, I know his dad was a toolmaker, and we keep hearing about that, but if he can't connect for any of those reasons, then I'm afraid we need Burnham to come in and save the Labour Party. And I think Andy Burnham can connect with traditional Labour voters, and he's the kind of guy that will present and could take on Farage, and get Farage punted.
I just think that they've not escaped the blunders of the early few weeks and months. So they come in and they basically, this is a government that's been captured by the Treasury. Most governments are. So they've accepted that they had to make a massive cut when they could have used the sort of goodwill that they had in the early few weeks to change the borrowing rules, maybe exclude defence spending from the borrowing rules. And so the first budget wouldn't have had to raise all those taxes, screwing up their plans for economic growth by hiking national insurance. They had that window of opportunity, early doors, to kind of change the conversation, change the narrative, but they're just in this spiral of tax rises, spending cuts, welfare cuts, and they just... You look at Starmer's dismal poll ratings, how can a guy ever recover from that?
And I think he just makes bad decisions. He just one after the other. Ian Murray is a classic case in point. Bad decision. Why make it? Mandelson, it's taken a while, 6 months or so, for this to come back and bite him, but it was a bad decision. He was told not to appoint Mandelson. He replaced Karen Pierce, who was a very effective and very popular with the Trump administration. She was always on Fox News. She was our ambassador. She was doing a great job. Why replace her? It's just a bad decision, and they all build up. And there's decisions that he will have made that are still to explode. But then there's decisions that he makes. I just have no confidence that he can get a big decision right.
The thing I would say is
he's done well in that. He's done well internationally, I think. Domestically, it's been extremely poor, but internationally, I think he's received a lot of credit.
But really, that's thanks to Trump. And that's thanks to the fact that Trump has this relationship with the UK. I mean, you could argue...
He's boxed clever, though, Starmer, in terms of the European partners and Trump. The way he sort of brandished that second state visit from his pocket. He's played his cards well. I mean, he could have blundered into alienated Trump and then God knows where we would be.
Yeah, true. That's the one thing he's got right.
And the thing to say in Starmer's favour and the Labour government more generally is they inherited an absolute bin fire from the Tories, which even Ben would have to admit. That bin fire is not yet out, and I think we'll be suffering the consequences of that disastrous handling of British governance and the economy for possibly a decade or more. The harm done by the Tories over those years is incalculable, and that's been part of Starmer's problem, is that he's not presented a message that people need to be patient in trying to rebuild Britain, or if he is trying to get a message across, it's not landing.
I'm not willing to write him off yet because, he's had a bad first year and the last couple of weeks have been awful. But, he's still a guy who overturned a massive Tory majority in one term to win a historic election for Labour. I just want, the budget to be a Labour budget. I mean, apart from immigration, where the country's moved to the right, and I accept that there have to be tougher rules on immigration and asylum, and we have to regain confidence in the entire system. When it comes to domestic policy, I want a Labour agenda, not this sort of triangulation where they're trying to, appeal to Tory voters and Reform voters. I think that they have to be progressive on that. And right now, they're not appealing to anyone. They're alienating their progressive base. And they are hated by the voters that they've lost to Reform. And this is just a recipe for winning 15% in the next election.
I have to just take issue. I think, and I've said this here before, the Sunak-Hunt administration had the economy on the right track. And I mean, I get that they were clearing up the mess made by the trust budget and all the rest of it. But I think if they'd stayed in power, the economy would be in a better shape. I just think that's...
Or, as well as the bin being on fire, the whole house would now be on fire.
I think they were a very capable, sensible administration.
Compared to some other Tories, but that's a very low bar.
The other thing I would say is just moving back to Starmer and Burnham. I was in Manchester recently, and I was down there for the weekend. The city seemed alive. It seemed buzzing. It seemed really on the up. And how much of that is down to Burnham, I don't know, but certainly...
You certainly give them the impression it's down to Burnham. Which is half the battle, convincing the public that it's actually a good job.
Exactly. If the rest of the UK had that same feel, there's trams buzzing here, there and everywhere.
Tony Blair managed to convince the country that he was responsible for the rise of Oasis, you know what I mean? So, if you get a politician... Exactly, man. Everyone associates Tony Blair with the resurgence of 90s guitar bands. But if you're a politician and you can convince people that you're part of the progress, part of the enthusiasm, the optimism, you're on a winner. Yeah. And I think Burnham could do that. It's difficult to see how Starmer can ever get that feel back. And he had the chance to do it after winning that election, and he kind of blew it, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I mean... the flip side, Anas Sarwar, Scottish Labour leader, what does this all mean for Labour's hopes at the Holyrood election? I mean, I think that Scottish Labour are going to keep their heads down for the rest of the year. It's going to be a difficult tax-raising budget. People are going to be pissed off, and then they'll come out the traps early in January with their alternative programme. But there was an opinion poll yesterday for the Welsh election, and it had Labour in... I wouldn't say distant third place, miles behind Plaid Cymru and Reform. And you look at the wins, the political wins just now, it is Labour losing support to Reform all over the country. Is it possible for Scottish Labour to win an election against that backdrop? Because it's hard to see it at this point.
I mean, I think the one bright spot for Scottish Labour is still the by-election. No one expected that result. And the vote would largely split three ways, and they were out ahead. So, I mean, I don't think it's all lost. I still think, in a way, all those years where Scottish Labour was sort of distanced themselves from the main Labour Party are kind of paying off now, because even though there is some reciprocal damage, I think voters do see them as two separate parties.
See, is that the case? Because, if voters do distinguish between UK and Labour and Scottish Labour, and when things like Rayner happens, that they don't blame, that would be good for them. I'm not convinced it is the case, because, you look at the general election, when Starmer was up in the polls, that helped Scottish Labour. Now that he's had an absolute stinker of a first year, that's clearly harmed Scottish Labour in the polls.
Yeah, I mean, there is a connection. I just don't know if I think there is a degree of separation that does help.
Or it could be, some Labour people I speak to want Starmer gone before the Scottish election, and they think that might give them the uplift they need to have a chance of maybe even coming in second and, maybe even coming in first. But they need a lift from somewhere now. I think Anas Sarwar is one of the best politicians in Britain, never mind Scotland. I think he's got an amazing story to tell, and he thinks deeply about how society can be improved and all that. It's going to be very difficult for him, though, to properly lead the debate at the Scottish Parliament elections if he's somebody to fight fires from UK Labour throughout that whole process. There must be people in Scottish Labour thinking, if we're going to get this done, let's get it done quick. Because I tell you what, I think Burnham would probably give Scottish Labour a lift as well. And And just one more thing, you were talking about immigration and asylum. I think Labour have got a good story to tell on immigration and asylum. You know, a lot of the people that make Scotland, click, that do the jobs that people need, are either from other countries or have come here as asylum seekers. There's a good story to tell there, and the idea that all working class voters are like frothing at the mouth, Farage racists, is just not an accurate picture. And I think Scottish Labour could tell the right story there, and possibly, combat the rise of Farage. But they need to get it right on immigration, and they need to get it right on asylum, and they can't just call everyone a racist who happens to raise issue with it.
So just on asylum, because I was wanting to talk about that. I had a story this week in the Record.
Yeah.
So the sort of history of this is that there's been a dispersal programme run by the Home Office. They outsource it to a contractor called Mears. And for years, it was only Glasgow of all the local authority areas that sort of bought into that. And so over 90% of the asylum seekers are housed in Glasgow. The last few years, that has been rolled out to all the other areas. We had a story this week basically showing that the rollout is moving at a snail's pace, and that for every 10,000 people, Glasgow's taking 58 asylum seekers, Edinburgh is taking 4 per 10,000, and there are about a third of council areas where there's no asylum seekers at all being housed. Now, I've got no issue with asylum seekers. This is not I'm focusing on the policy here. Surely there should be a much fairer, much more equitable distribution of asylum seekers around the country. It can't just all fall on one city, Glasgow.
But the reasons for this are because historically Glasgow had lots and lots of empty housing. The Red Road flats were, in the later years, were almost exclusively used to house asylum seekers. You look at the other councils that have large numbers of asylum seekers down south. I think the councils like Bolton, the councils like Doncaster, that perhaps are quite deprived areas, have lots of council houses, and people have moved away to the cities. They've moved away, and there's empty housing available. It's not in great shape, like the Red Road flats. It's kind of old, decrepit, but it's there and it's usable. Now, what Glasgow's done, it's been tearing down these tower blocks at a rate of knots, and they're being replaced with brand new social housing. So you've not got the same number of, there's no longer empty flats available because they've all been pulled down.
Well,
They are relying on bed and breakfast.
And they're relying on bed and breakfasts and new housing association flats that are new builds are now being used by Mears for asylum seekers, and yet people who are on the housing list can't get in. So it's.
I think it's a bit weird though that this is the Home Office in Mears. You've got Glasgow taking 58 asylum seekers per 10,000. Fife is 0. Highlands 0. I think Stirling 0.
But it was Glasgow Council's decision. They were like, no, send them all our way.
It's a partnership, but I mean it's funded, I think, by the Home Office. I'm just, Scotland as a unit. I think their figure is much lower than many areas in England, like the northwest and northeast and other areas. But I just think that, Glasgow's had a very, very good record on this. It's time for other councils to step up. Not councils. It's time for Mears to step up and actually roll this out properly to other council areas.
There are 2 points there. I think a fairer sharing of the weight of that this problem needs to be put in place. But I think there's another key problem is that the Scottish Government legislated to make it, with all the best intentions, to make it easier for people who are homeless to be given a legal right to a house. That sounded like a liberal and progressive thing that they did, but the actual effect on the housing situation has been negligible. But what it has done is it's given young single men priority often, or equal priority, as young women with families and such like. Yeah. And that's a perfect example of SNP legislation by campaign group diktat, rather than
Good intention, but problematic.
But yes, and that's one of the Scottish Parliament's biggest problems, and this goes back to lots of different bills that they've put in place. I'm thinking about the football disorder stuff. I'm thinking about the trans rights legislation that's so disastrous. A lot of Scottish Parliament legislation is basically the invention of do-gooders who don't actually understand how things work on the ground and who don't listen to working class people and what they have to say. They lecture, but they don't listen. And there's too much Scottish Parliament legislation has proved to be rubbish.
And tend to dump problems onto councils as well. They pass world-leading targets, world-leading, and it's then up to like Glasgow, Edinburgh Council to sort it out.
I'm going to put forward a proposal that was spelled out by none other than Andrew Neil recently. So if Andrew Neil backs it, in general, I think it's a good idea.
A great moderate, but
he said, so this isn't like, I'm not repeating something from Tommy Robinson or anyone else. This was Andrew Neil's idea. Build camps for asylum seekers. If we can build Nightingale hospitals and NHS Louisa Jordan, build basic with a
wire around them, perhaps.
Well, if you're here as an asylum seeker, you're fleeing war, you're fleeing persecution, you're fleeing famine. Surely a bunk bed in a ward, purposefully built, you've got basic standards of hygiene, you've got basic standards of healthcare, you've got, and until your claim is either accepted and then you move on into society, or rejected. And
no, I don't think camps would be a good idea. I would like asylum seekers to have proper accommodation, but I would like their applications to be processed a lot quicker. Yeah. And for councils to be given the funding if there is then a refugee homelessness situation. That's what I'd like. I don't want people in camps and boats and all this sort of stuff.
Well, let's be honest. We've not really got an asylum seeker problem in Scotland because we take far fewer asylum seekers than other parts of the UK and other countries. What we have in Scotland is a housing emergency because successive Tory and SNP administrations have done nothing to
100%
to sort out social housing.
What we need a house building programme that sorts out everyone's needs, and we need to kind of liberalise the planning rules to make that happen. Yeah. But just to go back to what you're saying, because we've got a story on this in the next Daily Record, and I think you'll have a view on this, Ben. But Smitty alluded to some of the legislation passed by the Scottish Parliament, basically abolishing priority need in terms of homelessness applications, and also this situation where if you're a refugee and you've been granted leave to remain in, say, England, you can come to Scotland. So our story is that Glasgow Council has confirmed there are about up to 500 homelessness applications from people in Liverpool, Manchester, London and Belfast, and these folk are basically declaring themselves homeless in Glasgow. Now, that is just not sustainable. It really isn't for a city like Glasgow. I don't think it's too much to say that if you're an asylum seeker and you've been granted refugee status in London and you're then homeless, you should be applying in London, not in Glasgow.
But the point is, the guys who are coming over and are usually well aware of the rules, and they're well aware that there is an automatic right to. So it's not. Glasgow City Council can complain all they like, but it's the Scottish Government that needs to remove this.
Yeah, so Susan Aiken, the SNP leader, has called for a pause on this legislation. Yeah. Labour politicians are calling for a pause as well. I think that pause is actually a decent call in the current situation.
It's sensible.
If you're going to, if you have a situation where refugees can apply to Glasgow, but there's not a similar right the other way around, you can see how it's going to be a problem for one city in Scotland. Again, it's like, good intentions but problematic outcomes. And
I mean, I don't know if seekers are aware. Obviously, they could apply in Orkney. They could apply in Aberdeen, because that right, it's not just a Glasgow right, it's Scotland. All Scottish councils are obliged to find housing for anyone who registers as homeless.
Yeah, I mean, it's... The situation facing Glasgow is a complete and utter nightmare. So they've got this £66 million black hole when it comes to the refugee homelessness situation.
But that's just 1 year. I think the second year, goes up above 100 million.
I just think that put a pause in the legislation and let's start a proper dispersal scheme and have asylum seeker applications processed, quickly rather than it being dragged out on. And then you've got the situation where asylum seekers, they can't work. They're in these awful grotty hotels, unemployed, no income coming in. It's a terrible situation for the taxpayer, for the asylum seekers, for everyone.
The problem is, though, you got in Glasgow, so you're saying speed up the process, and then the courts make a decision and say, look, you are not granted asylum, you're going to have to leave the country. And as we saw a few years down in Kenmore Street, when the Home Office came to legally remove 2 asylum seekers who didn't have leave to remain, they were stopped from doing so. And
I think
politicians
Labour government
still boast about that.
I think, wasn't there a story though, a couple of weeks ago, the Labour government is looking to kind of completely overhaul the tribunal appeal system.
Well, I mean, that would be good. Yeah, I agree. It needs to be quicker. It needs to be
A lot of the
quicker.
people coming to Glasgow as well, remember, they have been given legal leave to remain. They've been given the right to remain, and then they're presenting themselves as homeless in Glasgow.
Right, okay.
So a lot of them they're here legally, but they're basically made destitute by a system that's not been properly thought out by the Home Office, and the SNP and the Home Office need to knock their heads together to try and work out a fair and humane way to deal with that.
It's the system, it's not the asylum seekers.
No, exactly. But Labour need to get their heads around it and start, start getting a message out there that
I think it's
that's the trick,
It's a loser for Labour. It's lose-lose. They can't win on this.
They could neutralise it by actually getting a grip of the system and having a system that's fair to the taxpayer, to asylum seekers, that has relative public support. That would be not a bad outcome.
Yeah.
But, I mean, good luck on that front.
Yeah, well, I think Andrew Neil's got the right idea.
Yes. No, I won't be seconding that one. Obviously, Trump's in town. Is this a good or a bad thing for Starmer? I mean, it seems like there's a tech deal on the table that looks good for British jobs.
And in Scotland, there's a place in Airdrie apparently going to get a lot of these jobs. That is a game changer for a lot of industries to be welcomed. And again, that's Starmer doing well on an international stage.
But one slip of the tongue and it could be a disaster. Trump might say, that was a really bad idea that he got rid of Mandelson.
Yeah.
He was a great guy.
The first press conference where Starmer and Trump are together, they're not going to get asked about the tech deal. They're not going to ask about Starmer's really good performance on the international stage, even when it comes to Ukraine and other issues. They're going to get asked, why the hell did you appoint a guy that's mates with a pedo as your ambassador to the US? And it's going to be a terrible embarrassment for everyone involved.
Trump will be like, me and Mandelson were round at Epstein's house together. We had a great time.
Exactly.
Starmer's going to be standing there looking like a...
The thing is, you just don't know what Trump's going to say. His press conferences are just gold. It could start off with a Mandelson and then it could just go off.
We don't have a press conference today, I don't think, do we? I think that'll be tomorrow.
I think so. It's more the royal...
it's all pomp and circumstance today and all lovely jubbly. And then tomorrow we'll get into that absolute bomb scare of a press conference, which I'm really looking forward to. I think that will be popcorn stuff for all involved.
Indeed. Final thing, Robert Redford died this week. As journalists, we will all know him as one of the stars in All the President's Men, playing Bob Woodward. What a performance, what a film.
Yeah.
Great movie.
I know. I always wonder who would play me, when they come and make the film of the glory days of the Daily Record. I'm thinking probably Marty Feldman maybe, or...
Grado.
Grado would be a good one. Ronnie Corbett, if he was still alive. Would have been he would have portrayed me very well. Short Jambo. That's basically the typecast there.
Just watching the film again, it's like they had about 3 months to work on a story.
3 months. Yeah. Of course, I give all my reporters 3 months to work on every story.
Yeah.
I meant 3 minutes, sorry.
If we had Watergate, you'd be like, can you do video on that? We need like 6 online hits and...
Yeah, but we've still got a story.
Change days.
Yeah. What was the name of his contact again? I can't remember.
Deep Throat.
Oh, yeah. So I just wanted to hear you say that.
All right, I think that's it. Thanks very much to Mark and to Ben for joining me. You can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.